who is not, anyone who's not able to catch the whole presentation, the whole webinar, we are recording it now and it will be available for you afterwards. But thank you and good morning, everyone. So I'm Marlise Taylor, Director of Research for Visit NC, and I am happy to welcome you to our webinar today. If you heard just a minute ago, we will be recording it, so it will be available for you afterwards. But we've got some great information on the meetings and convention sector to share with you today. But first, I do want to share with you a little bit of our most recent sentiment research, as Whit usually shares with you. So let me share my screen really quickly. Okay. Sorry, I think I have the wrong kind of. There we go. Okay, everyone. So let me share with you a little bit of the most recent tourism sentiment research that we have. And again, this is overall US level travel sentiment. So we just received the most recent data from destination analysts yesterday. And so you can see here where general optimism regarding the pandemic is looking up. In the most recent sentiment research that we did receive yesterday, we could see that those who are pessimistic about the pandemic's course over the next month is significantly less than it was 2 weeks ago. It dropped from 51% on September 6th to 39% this week. Though there are still more travelers who are more pessimistic than optimistic about the next month's course in the pandemic, things are looking much better this week. Most Americans are now marketable for travel. The percent of American travelers who are highly open to travel inspiration also grew in the last 2 weeks from 65% or from 58% 2 weeks ago to 65% this week. However, Americans are resigned to the fact that COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon. The strong majority of American travelers reported in this research that they feel it is likely or very likely that COVID-19 will be with us long term, and it is a barrier to getting fulfillment out of travel experiences. You can see here that nearly 41% say that they are pretty seriously impacted, or their travel experiences is, by the pandemic. When asked to share in one word how they feel about COVID-19 being with us longer term, not surprisingly, the words they provided were sad, frustrated, scared, and bad, with the top response being sad. That's just a brief update. We certainly will have a little bit more information on that in our weekly news link that you should receive today. But today, we are here to get a better understanding about sentiment towards meetings and conventions. So let me welcome Chris Davidson from MMGY Global and David Blansfield from Northstar Meetings Group, who will each be presenting recent research from their organizations that they have done with regards to this segment that we know is very important to many of you. David Blansfield manages Northstar Travel Group's meetings, brands, and event businesses, including meetings and conventions, successful meetings, meeting news, incentive, sport travel, esports travel, and teams, as well as Northstar's meeting platforms in Europe and Asia. Chris Davidson oversees MMGY Travel Intelligence, MMGY Global's Research Insights and Strategy Division. He is responsible for the agency's portfolio of syndicated and custom research projects, including its Portrait of American Travelers, its DK Shiflett suite of travel performance products, and many others. He directs the organization's substantial commitment to how these data and insights are applied to inform marketing strategies for its global portfolio of accounts. We're going to hear first from David this morning, and then Chris. And then if you have questions for either of the presenters or myself, please put them in the Q&A, and we will have plenty of time at the end of the presentations to answer them. So let me welcome David Blansfield.
Thank you very much, Marlise. I'm going to see if I can go ahead and share my screen as well. Hopefully you all are seeing my slides. the future of meeting events in the era of COVID-19. I'm seeing it on mine. I'm assuming you can see it on yours. So
Good, David.
and by just giving you a brief introduction, if you don't know Northstar Travel Group, we are a global travel and information services media company serving travel professionals in the US and around the world. That's all we do. That's the only market we cover. I'm sure you're familiar with the breadth of our brands. On the retail side, you've got Travel Weekly and Travel Pulse, corporate travel, you've got business travel news, sports travel, research, Focusrite, several events, obviously, and we serve the incentive market as well. So we serve a broad portfolio of professional travel business decision makers, nearly 2 million actively engaged professionals in our database. My responsibility, I'm here representing the topic of today's webinar, meetings, events, professional business events in particular. You probably are familiar with Successful Meetings and Meetings and Conventions. Those are the primary brands. But since the pandemic, we've really pivoted to covering COVID all the time, basically. That's been our world as it relates to business events. So we've really stepped up our game in terms of the research that we've generated, as well as the 24/7 coverage that has been necessary to keep track of states and their protocols and guidelines, countries, their protocols and guidelines. And we're still seeing, every day news related to countries opening up, or the requirements that are necessary to get in and out, and the various protocols that are necessary to gather together professionally. So it's kept us very, very busy. And obviously that information has been very much heavily in demand. So we continue to serve that demand through all the brands and through all the products that we serve. None has been more, I think, central to our purpose than this pulse survey that we've been doing since the pandemic began back in March of 20. Every few weeks, we've been polling the meeting planning community to get a sense of their expectations and their activities going forward, to give to give each other an understanding of what others are going through, to put their experience into some kind of context, because as we know, the meeting planning community is very broad, very particular, very fragmented. So one person's predicament may not necessarily be another's. So we've attempted to use these pulse surveys not only to help bring hope to some when it comes to understanding what others are doing and how they're doing it, but also to guide suppliers, destinations, hoteliers, and others related to the industry to get a better understanding of how planners are looking ahead to planning their businesses and how they can respond to serve them. So what I'm going to do today is just share our most recent pulse survey results. This is somewhat dated, I must admit. A week is a lifetime in COVID time, as many of you know, as Marlise's first slide shows, the variability to folks' feelings and expectations as it relates to travel, COVID, and business events. So, on average, we've been getting about 1,000 responses to every cycle. This particular one, we had 826 planners who participated in it. So yes, it's statistically significant. And each cycle has been on or around by plus or minus 1 or 2 percentage points, the types of decision makers who have participated in the survey. So lion's share are associations, nonprofits, professional conference organizers, but as you can see, a good percentage of corporate decision makers as well as third-party planners, and some slices of sports and government and SMERF activity as well. Average is around 12 events per participant, 12 events per planner per year. And the average attendee size is around 250 to 300 people. This has remained very consistent throughout the 18 months that we've been doing these surveys. So what I'm going to share with you is kind of a primary indicator that we've been looking at here. This is a key kind of KPI for us. And if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see kind of, this is the new business activity, the booking new events and the sourcing actively column will give you a good indication of how the industry has evolved since the beginning of this year. Obviously, we have data that goes back to 20, but I'm only sharing kind of the last 6 months of data just to give you a sense of how optimism was translating into, into new business up until July. So the momentum was really growing during the July time period to business event planners really getting back to booking new events, as opposed to, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, the rescheduling or rebooking. So as booking and sourcing on the right-hand side of your screen has grown over time since January, you can see that hardly virtuous cycle of having to reschedule and rebook, which is every planner's nightmare, beginning to decline. But unfortunately, as we saw in August, you're seeing an uptick now in rescheduling and rebooking. And obviously, we're very keen to see whether or not this key indicator has changed at all over the last month. Certainly the change from July, we hit that peak in July, and now we seem to have gone back into a bit of a reassessment period as to whether or not business event planners could proceed with the events that they had planned. Very quick assessment of how quick planners have had to act as a result of the Delta variant and the increasing cases that we experienced in the summer pretty darn quickly. So in that August cycle, we saw that 1 in 3 planners had already rescheduled, moved, or canceled their upcoming events over the past 6 weeks since we had done that July cycle, which showed so much optimism. So clearly, planners were very, very quick to respond at the behest of either the corporations that they serve or the event organizers or the event owners that they're working for. So what we're trying to get to in this next cycle, I don't mean to anticipate what we're looking at here, but we're hearing a lot anecdotally about folks beginning to reschedule, cancel events. And we're really trying to get to the genesis of the reasons why. When you have that disconnect of seeing stadiums and concert halls filled with people without wearing masks, or you see some of the statistics about how people are traveling again. August was a record-breaking month in many places for leisure travel. One wonders, exactly what the rationale may be for some of the reasons why event organizers are rescheduling, moving, or canceling their events. We're hoping to get more information about that in this current cycle. From the last cycle, though, as cases have risen, confidence has fallen. As of August 19th, 70% of planners were less optimistic in August than they were in July. No surprise, and obviously consistent with some of the swings that Marlise shared at the beginning of this webinar. What we found interesting was the percentage of events that people are now planning that will be online only. Even though there was this latest surge of COVID cases, there wasn't a quick, rapid pivot to all virtual and all digital. I think we all recognize that many of us were Zoomed out, your attendance at this webinar notwithstanding. But I felt a lot of us in the travel industry in particular were eager to get back to meeting face-to-face again, as obviously were many of the folks who responded to the survey. So even though they were forced to reconsider and perhaps rebook their events, there didn't seem to be a knee-jerk, visceral return to thinking about digital. Now that may not necessarily been due to COVID, but also obviously there's been a lot of discussion about the virtual business model and how that could work for event organizers whose business events are a central part of their business models. This was also something that we found very, very interesting, because even though folks were rescheduling or moving or canceling, there still seemed to be a pretty good confidence level of business event planners expecting to get their next event in before the end of this year. So, hope was eternal for many of these business planners when we conducted the survey with no real significant change from July to August of expectations for being able to successfully produce the events that they had planned through the end of this year. So, obviously we're very keen on this. Northstar is an event organizer ourselves. And yes, we've had to cancel or move some events, but some of our larger events, we're very, very hopeful, and we're still planning to produce and execute on those events through the end of this year. Obviously, I think a really big factor here is the first bar, the reduction in in-person attendance. So there has been a continued lack of confidence in size of event. And I think this gets to this whole rationale as to the forward-thinking planning process and whether or not just because of cases and fear of contagion, but also I think now there's a legitimate fear of whether or not the business model works for many of these event planners. So does the reduction in in-person attendance have more of an impact on the evaluation of the successful production of an event relative to the fear of contagion and the fear of folks' reaction to protocols that are required, for example. So yes, a reduction in in-person attendance is very much expected. And just over half are assuming they're going to require more protocols than they had originally planned in the July cycle. And this could have an impact, and it certainly has had an impact on some of our events where we've had to comply with protocols that folks weren't necessarily happy about. So a lot of this obviously will have an impact on what the back half of this year is ultimately going to look like. And we're going to really try to drill down on whether or not this expectation has changed at all. And again, whether or not this expectation is going to have a material impact on the go or no go decisions that event organizers are going to be making over the next couple of weeks and months. For protocols, most planners are relying on state and local mandates. That's the big number. But we still see some hesitation to move forward on various protocols like requiring proof of a negative COVID-19 test or requiring proof of vaccination. It's still a minority for some. But obviously, I think a lot of that depends upon where you're doing your event. We had to do an event. We did an event in New York City a week after proof of vaccination was required, not only for gathering in the hotel ballroom, but also to take advantage of going to any bars or restaurants. One had to provide proof of vaccination. So, and that happened a week before the event. So obviously, event organizers are quite busy in having to be able to respond quickly to changes in protocols that are being asked of them in the places in which they're doing their events. I talked to one event organizer yesterday, 100 speakers, and at the upcoming event that they had planned. And obviously, any single change in protocols required in terms of communicating with speakers, and then speakers feeling uncomfortable about complying with those protocols, having to back out. It's a nightmare for a lot of these planners to not only be dealing with attendees who are concerned, but other stakeholders that are involved in the events that they have planned. What's vexing planners right now? This, as you can see on the kind of the center, the hotel venues lack staffing. That number has grown over time. So just be mindful of the fact that the meeting planning community is expressing some degree of frustration in being able to plan or produce events in places where staffing is a bit short or doesn't exist at all. We had to pivot on our New York event because the hotel in which we had planned the event was not prepared to work with us to manage. They hadn't had a business event prior to ours, and they weren't prepared to produce it in time for ours. So we had to, 3 weeks prior to that event, we had to find a new hotel. So things are exciting, obviously, on the meeting planning side, and the supplier community obviously needs to be sensitive to that. But here you can see the range of concerns that they have, and they're not immaterial because you've got over half of planners involved experiencing frustration in one or more areas. And we always love to provide the verbatim comments that we get because they are somewhat indicative of the lives that our meeting planning customers and stakeholders are living. We feel very strongly at Northstar that if we can meet, we should. So as a company in the travel sector, we feel it is our responsibility to demonstrate how one can meet safely and execute on those protocols. The industry has done a fantastic job in helping us meet safely. All of the various associations and organizations that have contributed to meeting safely. I think, and this Freeman survey, if we haven't talked about it, we should. Freeman survey shows that you're safer going to a business event than you are going to your grocery store. So yes, we can meet safely and we should. But COVID is a roller coaster and it makes planning for it extremely tough for the meeting planning community now. They have to remain fluid. And obviously down below, we've done business for a year in the digital environment. My hotel partners just need to be aware that my sleeping room space is going to decrease, but my need for their technology and meeting space is going to go up. It's not only heads and beds these days. So obviously, I think a lot of meeting planners are trying to understand what's going to be the mix between education provided virtually and education provided in person. And then what's that in-person experience going to look like going forward? If we're going to get attendance numbers back up. These are all questions that the industry really needs to address. Be happy to take any questions that we have at the end of the program. Again, thank you for your time, Marlise, and I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, David. That was really interesting. I was jotting down notes as you were going along, so thank you so much. We're going to turn it over to Chris Davidson now. So Chris, if you would like to share your screen.
I will indeed.
Great, and thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And Marlise, thank you. And David, thank you. That was great information. I think in many ways, very consistent with some of the things that I'll share this morning and what we're observing in the business events industry as well. And, there's obviously some good news in there and a lot of news that is not as good as anyone would like it to be. So let's dive in and we'll take a look at what we're seeing. Again, as David mentioned, just 1 minute on MMGY. Travel intelligence, as Marlise pointed out, we are the market research division of MMGY Global, and we publish, for those of you out there may have seen, our Portrait of American Travelers study, which we've been publishing for about 38 years now, consistently every year, and now we do quarterly. Our DK Shiflett suite of products on travel performance metrics, as well as studies we've recently authored on underrepresented traveler audiences, including the one we're releasing this week called Vistas Latinas, profiling Hispanic travelers in the U.S. So I think a lot of work we're doing there on the leisure side and in different areas, but we've been doing this study looking at the meetings industry now all year, and we're doing it on a quarterly basis. And let me give you a sense of what we're looking at. First, I'd point out that our approach is a little bit where it differs is that we're not just looking at business event planners. So we're looking at attendees as well as business event planners, and in many cases we're looking at their perceptions and how they compare and oftentimes where they're differing right now. And so as they look out on the horizon line, not only what they plan to do, but what affects their decision making, what influences that, what barriers there are to successful meetings and so forth. So you see here we've again surveyed on a quarterly basis meeting planners as well as attendees each of the last 3 quarters. We just released this study this week on Monday. So let me just give you some of the highlights of what we're seeing. First of all, from a location perspective, we ask both attendees and planners, and on the attendee side, where would you like to attend a meeting? And we give them a long list of destinations, and this is the rank order in the red bar on a mean score rating on a 5-point scale for where attendees would like to attend a meeting in the next 2 years. And then you can see the black bar indicates where planners would like to plan a meeting, where they expect to plan a meeting in the next 2 years as well. So you can see there's some variability, and specifically I'll highlight for this call, North Carolina, you can see as a state, it's attendees are, when you look at a top 2 box basis, you see there 48% of attendees rate North Carolina as a top 2 box for a destination as a state again, that they would like to visit within the next, or would like to attend a business event in the next 2 years, where you can see it's a little bit lower for planners, but still ranks in the top 10 of a long list of destinations about which we asked. Specifically within North Carolina, when you break that out a little bit, these are the destinations that we asked about, and you can see in rank order where attendees first said that they would like to attend a meeting. And of those who said they would like to attend a meeting in North Carolina, we asked them about these individual destinations within North Carolina. You can see that Charlotte and Raleigh and Asheville top that list. And you can see the rank order below that, all pretty solid scores. From a planner perspective, it's actually fairly consistent. There's a little bit of a difference between Winston-Salem, Wilmington, and then Durham in terms of the rank order there. But again, Charlotte, Raleigh, and Asheville are at the top of that list from a planner perspective. So one of the things that we're looking at is, understanding the dynamic around in-person meetings. And you can see here, we asked this in a number of different ways, and I'll kind of highlight 3 things here on the next 3 slides. The first is just the top 5 decision factors overall for an attendee looking to attend a meeting, conference, or convention. And, I'd point out that at the top of that list, even amidst COVID and concerns about safety, and obviously the need to have a compelling agenda, and you see all those things represented in the top 5. But at the top of the list, the appeal of the destination still wins the day. It's a place I want to go. It's a place I want to see, a place I want to do things at, potentially extend my trip. I'll show you the bleisure, even though I hate that word, bleisure, a couple of stats on that at the end, where there's a strong intent to stay around and experience the destination to which they've traveled for a business event. So the importance of the destination brand and selling the destination is obviously, or it's apparent here as you look at the rank order, top 5 decision makers for attendees overall. When we dig into specifically on the safety, question of safety, we asked a number of different questions in terms of the extent to which these factors affect decision-making for both attendees and planners again. You can see the red bar represents attendees, and you can see it is sorted top to bottom here actually by planners scores, the black bar. But you can see that the level of crime in a destination is relatively more important for a planner as they think about planning a business event in a specific destination. And then at the bottom, you see that this discussion of defunding the police seems to be a talking point that is more important, I guess, or at least more concerning potentially for a prospective attendee for a meeting, and a little bit less so for sure from a meeting, from a business event planner perspective. But you can see the relative scores again are pretty similar. The takeaway here is that crime, safety, and these issues here as they relate to that are all still very top of mind for both planners and attendees as you think about traveling to attend a meeting in person. We also looked, and these are a little bit further down the list in terms of factors that affect the decision to attend a meeting, or in the case of a planner, to plan a meeting. But you can see these are the ones, again, a little bit further down the list, but also a great deal of variability between the percent respondents. And this is the top 2 box percentage. The people that said that these were impacting, important, very impactful, or somewhat impactful in terms of their decision to either attend or plan a meeting. And you can see here that, again, the ability to drive rather than fly, much more top of mind for a prospective attendee, where planners are less likely to consider that in terms of their destination selection. Environmental responsibility of the destination, you can see here, again, much more important for an attendee. The commitment to, or the perception of a destination's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, also more important, although the gap is a lot tighter on that one. And then the politics of the host destination, more than half of attendees said that was an important decision in affecting if they plan to attend a meeting. As we look at, we looked at this question about, the expectation that both attendees have of going back and attending meetings in various forms, either in person, virtually, or in some sort of hybrid situation. We asked about that given the current situation here, and you can see that there's a great deal of variability again here in the responses. So for the attendee, it's pretty evenly split, right? You've got 40% of people say that they would prefer to attend a virtual meeting or conference or convention. 30% saying they would like to go in person, and then 30% saying a hybrid meeting of conference or convention is the way to go. Now, obviously, there's some, there's a bias here from a planner perspective because it's their business, but you can see that here, virtual meetings are certainly not the favored choice for a planner, but there is a fairly even split between in-person meetings and hybrid meetings. This is on a current basis. Now I'm going to go and show you the future basis, and then we asked the respondents to consider post-COVID how they would think about this. And so I want to just clue you in first. These will not be in the same order, which is a little confusing, and probably I should have changed it. But the in-person meetings will be at the top in this one as I reveal it. So as you look at in-person meetings and compare on the current situation, the second one down, you can see how that compares to in-person meetings now in a post-COVID situation, where 43%, so a little bit more than 40%, but that's a key point here. If you look at a post-COVID situation, only 43% of attendees are saying they would prefer to attend a meeting in person. And obviously the number of planners who say that the percentage of planners goes up from 46% up to 79%. So it's a pretty significant jump there, but attendees, not so much, which is a little concerning, clearly. And you can see that that distribution stays fairly equal, although it does go up a little bit on the in-person meetings for attendees, but that's kind of the key takeaway from the slide, and it's not great news. One of the things we asked about was attendees. We described a scenario where there would be smaller in-person meeting locations that are connected together to form a large meeting. Connected via the cloud to form a large meeting. So it might have local content, in-person experiences, networking opportunities, et cetera. It might offer the opportunity to drive rather than fly, for example, but then connecting, for major speakers and, shared content across that cloud connected meeting. And we asked then the appeal of that from an attendee perspective and a planning professional perspective. You can see it's much more appealing for an attendee. And, it's not surprising given the complications and the cost of doing that from a planner perspective. But you can see it's much more, again, this is kind of a theme you'll see throughout the findings is that there's, the things that will be appealing for an attendee that will make them want to pack a bag and travel, go to a meeting in person, for example, are not necessarily the things that planners are typically attuned to offering or that they want to offer. And it may be for a very good reason, because it's either very complicated technologically, or less cost effective, or whatever it might be. But that is a pretty significant finding of this work. Similarly, we asked them if they expect to attend a meeting, this cloud connected meeting in the next, forgive me, I think it's the next 24 months, yes. And as you look at that, again, attendees are much more likely to raise their hand and say, yeah, I expect to attend a meeting just like that, whereas planners are much more likely to say, not at all likely for me to plan that type of meeting. That theme continues as we look at venues for meetings. And you can see here we asked about various types of meeting venues. And you can see here that things like venues that are truly unique to a destination, historic landmarks, sporting venues, something that's a little bit unique and authentic to the destination in which the meeting takes place, or conference or convention. And you can see those are much more popular with attendees than they are for planning professionals. And again, for the obvious reason that it's very expensive, sometimes technologically limiting to be able to do that. And so the planner is much more attuned to offering that in a hotel or resort ballroom and conference facility, as I expect many of you on the call are probably saying, yeah, that's what we want them to do, because that's what business we're in. But it is, again, the theme that we're seeing is that there's, in order to get the attendee to say, I'm willing to travel again. In fact, I want to travel again. And there's reasons I want to travel again, but I want certain things. And I'd like, yeah, that's a very appealing way to offer that. And I think that we need, as a, from a meetings perspective, may need to look at how we're meeting the needs of the prospective attendees if we expect that business to come back to pre-pandemic levels anytime soon. The impact of COVID on planning, I'll call your attention here to the portions of the pie chart in red. You can see here, I'll just read those quickly. The rise, the 39% there is the rise in cases of COVID-19 related to the Delta variant has caused me to reconsider my plans to travel for a business conference or convention in the next 6 months. But again, importantly, they haven't made that decision officially yet. And then the 14%, excuse me, the 14% have actually canceled previously confirmed plans. So over half of people, have reconsidered or are reconsidering their plans to attend a business event related to the rise of the Delta variant. So again, I think that's pretty consistent with the numbers that David shared earlier as well. So this is something that I found very interesting from David's slides, and that planners are generally less inclined to offer some of these safety protocols or to require, importantly, to require these safety protocols. And I'll call your attention to a few at the bottom there. Required vaccinations for all meeting, conference, and convention staff. Well, 72% of attendees said that would make them more likely to attend a meeting. That's something they would like in a meeting that they choose to attend. Proof of vaccination for any attendee in order to attend. 71% of attendees say, yeah, that's something I want. Whereas only 50% or 51% of planners say that that's something that they would plan to do. And then venues requiring a negative COVID test, you can see here again, 70% to 44%. So there is a pretty significant disconnect, I would argue, between what attendees want and what planners are willing to provide or are able to provide, given the complications or the complexities or the cost of doing so. So, and that goes into, as David pointed out, the decision to being able to execute a successful business event and do it profitably. We look at and we ask attendees if they're willing to sign a waiver releasing organizers from risk liability in order to attend. And that number has been fairly high, saying yes, but that number did fall slightly from 77% in wave 2 down to 73%. So, it is statistically significant in terms of that decline, but it is just a minor decline overall. And what are the barriers to planning? You can see here, again, we're capturing wave 1 in gray, wave 2 in black, and wave 3 in red. And you can see, those are rank order top down by wave 3. You can see that the ability to ensure the financial success of planning the meeting is obviously the key barrier. And that's not surprising. It's 3 and 4, cite that as an important barrier. But each of these, what jumps out to me is that each of these are listed, more than half of planners are telling us these are all important. So lack of available venues that can provide sufficient space for social distancing, that's a concern. All of these things that are listed here, and I won't read each of them individually, but all of these are concerns. And you can see how those, trend over the course of the last 3 quarters. And so we asked them on an open-end basis, what is it that they need from destinations in order to plan more effective business events going forward. Transparency, flexibility, and the assistance, which is a fairly typical piece in that third bucket. But those are the top things that rose to the surface as we consolidated all those open-end responses. And we just want to know what's going on, what's the situation, make it clear, make it easy, and then be flexible with us in terms of how we schedule that so that there are, minimums or less in the way of minimums required, or cancellation policies are a little more lenient, or whatever that might be. But those are the top things that they need from destinations according to the survey. In most important metrics, you can see here, this is, I think, again, it doesn't surprise me, but I think it's interesting to see the relative distribution of the responses as well as the rank order. but overall attendee satisfaction at the top. And attendance and profitability, the fact that profitability of the event is third and by a fairly significant margin was a little surprising to me. But I was actually encouraged to see that overall attendance satisfaction rises to the top, because that ultimately should lead to better attendance and better profitability over time. So it's probably in the proper order as we would like to see it, but it was a little surprising to me as I looked at those results. And then the last area, I'll just show you two quick stats on, I mentioned leisure. Have you extended your stay, your business travel for a leisure visit in the host destination? You can see that 65% of people responded that they have in the past 24 months. And then as we look forward, about 2/3 of people expect to extend it in the next 12 months as well. So 35% were extremely likely. So definitely a good opportunity to think about not only, the segmentation of business travel and leisure travel in your destinations, but also very important to consider the overlap or the integration of those two into a single trip. So I'll just kind of highlight these quickly. You've seen them, but just as a key takeaway, and you'll see this in the if you want to share this video, but safety and all the different safety factors, because it's not just one thing, obviously, but all those are still very much top of mind, both for attendees and planners. Attendees are much more likely to express the preference for virtual and hybrid meetings, not only today, but going forward in a post-COVID environment. And that was pretty surprising and not or certainly very concerning as well. The appeal of the destination, as I mentioned, still the top factor for people deciding to go. And I just think that, the key takeaway for me in that point, as well as kind of other themes across the findings here, is that we've got to, as an industry, figure out ways to convince people to pack a bag to make the trip. And what makes that trip more compelling? What is it that we need to do a little bit different to make people say, that's something I need to see for myself? It's not something I can experience online. It's not something I can even get from a hybrid event. It's something I really need to be part of. And that needs to be, I think, a fundamental rethink in our business. Attendees are much more likely to consider the ability to drive. And then, as I mentioned, some of these other categories, the impact on the environment, which could be related there, commitment to diversity, and then the politics of the destination. Those are all much more important factors for the attendee than the planner gives credit for today. And then there seems to be a disconnect between what attendees prefer in a venue and what attendees or what planners really want or can provide realistically. And finally, the attendees are much more likely to require or want required vaccinations or frequent testing or negative tests for both attendees, other attendees, as well as the host venue staff, employees. So those are some of the key findings, and certainly be happy to address any questions that all of you have as well. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Lots of really good data there, and hoping to have some questions here from our audience. Let me get these open. I do have one question. It's not directed toward either one of you specifically, but one person asked, how are planners handling the staffing issues that continue to be the largest problem? I think both of you mentioned that, but with executing these type of events and the lack of staffing, how are planners handling that?
Well, from my perspective, planners are working harder and they're having to spend more. But that being said, there are other counterparties now, like technology companies, who have the capability, like Clear and other platforms that planners are using for the purposes of, if it is required, uploading testing, proof of vaccination, agreeing to various protocols and liability waivers and whatnot. Planners are getting creative, as are the venues in which meetings are being held. Yes, it's coming at an expense, but if you can if to Chris's point, and Chris, I thought your data was really fascinating in terms of the disconnect between planner and attendee expectations here. If they will come, if the attendees will come, then at least you can underwrite, what is necessary to support your event going forward. And we're a case in point, and we have to do on-site testing at one of our upcoming events for 1,000 attendees. It's going to cost us, but at the same time, our partner at the destination is working closely with us to help facilitate that for us and make it available for us at an affordable price. So I think everybody's working together to try to get through this. But there's no denying that ultimately, if your costs are going to increase, then something's got to change with the business model. And if the attendance is going to be impacted, then obviously you've got to find other sources of revenue to support those costs.
Well, the other thing I would offer on that, and I agree with everything David just said, is that just pointing out that I think what is probably a fairly well-known fact, but the expectations of the attendee really aren't changing all that much. You would hope that they would. You would hope that they would be a little cognizant of the fact that, that the host venues are struggling to attract employees, et cetera. But the simple reality is it's like, listen, I'm paying the same amount of money or more to attend an event, and I expect the service level and the experience to be potentially even better because we're coming out of a COVID environment or hopefully we're coming out of a COVID environment, the perception being, and the expectations are high that it's going to be a great experience. So I think that introduces another level of risk that if we're not meeting their needs in terms of what that experience looks like, and the host venue is understaffed and struggles to provide the level of service that's become the norm or accepted, that increases the likelihood that attendee is not going to be satisfied and potentially not decide to return. So it is a critically important issue. And you say, how are we handling it as an industry? Certainly as best we can. I mean, it's hiring, I think, what we're seeing is that, it's continually expressed as a problem and a challenge, but it's something that everyone's working as hard as possible to staff up. And it's not the answer probably you're looking for in terms of specific action steps, but just a general comment that it's a very big issue on top of everything else.
Great, thank you. The next question, I'm sorry, I was reading the question. The next question is about the local populations or the destinations vaccination rate. Is it going to be a consideration for meeting planners as to whether they pick a certain destination, or do you think they are just worried about the host facility staff being vaccinated?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and pull the exact number, but that is something that we're seeing that is a factor that's influencing decision about whether to attend is what is the vaccination rate in the host destination. And there are, as you break that data down, there are political divides, there are age divides, there are others, that impact that, but that is certainly a factor that influences the decision of whether or not to travel. So while those things can certainly influence if the host destination or the host venue rather were to ensure vaccinations for all attendees and employees, then that probably in the destination becomes a bit of less of an issue, especially if it's more of a contained event. But certainly going to play a factor and does in our research come up as a factor that's among others considered in terms of where, when, and if they decide to travel for the event.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it has a huge impact, not only the case level at the given time, but also the policies and the protocols in the destination where the meeting is being held. The anecdote I shared about the conference that ultimately had to be canceled with 100 speakers was in a state that will go unnamed, that the determination was made that they could not require vaccination as a prerequisite to attend. And without the ability to effect that particular protocol, none of the speakers, and it was a high-level conference, professional conference, none of the speakers were willing to attend, or a majority of them were not willing to participate, making it very difficult for the event organizer to produce that particular event. So not only cases, but protocols, I think, can have a significant impact on the business prospect of the event.
Thanks. Any research insights on what factors make for a strong hybrid meeting in the eyes of attendees or planners, now that we're seeing that this is going to be a choice going forward for a lot of people? What would make a strong hybrid meeting?
I mean, what I would offer is that we don't ask specifically about hybrid meetings in the research, so this is more interpretive than it is directly from the data. But based on some of the things that we saw about the the experience, the venue, what is it, and why do people travel for meetings, and what is it, again, as I said before, that will make somebody pack a bag and go? So that's the combination of that local experience, the experience you'll have for those attending in person, is certainly an important part of that. But also, the technology, how seamless it is. I can tell you from personal experience, there have been a number of hybrid meetings that I've been part of virtually, and it's very difficult to understand, to hear questions that are being asked, to go back and forth between what's shown on the screen, what's shown on your screen, what's offered live, and so the production of the event is, again, typically the most complicated and expensive part of it, but if done well, that can be a real, competitive advantage over time. But I think that has been clearly a struggle, and probably is part of the reason why hybrid meetings are not the preferred meeting, at least in the current environment. They're really kind of neck and neck, or a little bit below the others, at least in my view.
Yeah, it's not there yet in terms of the technology or the cost or the staffing required to produce it in a fashion that would make it dynamic enough to provide value, a monetary value, to the folks who are attending virtually. I think that it's a least common denominator approach right now. Most planners are saying, okay, how do we satisfy the stakeholders who just will not come, or who cannot come, but who we are obliged to serve? So they will make content available in a fashion like we are making content available now, usually at a period of time after the event. So they don't have to produce it live. They record it and make it available on demand after the meeting. That's where we see a lot of organizations going right now.
And Chris, in your presentation, it was disheartening to see that post-COVID, that increased desire for or decreased desire for in-person meetings even after COVID. What can we do about that? It was 30% prefer virtual even after COVID. I know this isn't data that you have, but how do we address that in terms of, after this is all over, hopefully it will be over one day, but what are we going to do about those who still prefer virtual?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you look at it, I mean, the common discussion, at least that I've been part of, is making this parallel between, in my view, a mistake to make the parallel between what's happening in the leisure travel front and what's happening in business travel, not only meetings and conventions, but also corporate transit travel and so forth. Is that on the leisure travel side, leisure travel has always been considered essentially a birthright. People want to travel, they're excited to travel, they want to see new places. Business travel is a little bit different, and still for many people that's very much the same inspiration for that, and the same reason that they want to do that, but they also have to do it, and there's a business reason. And with technology and what's happening with Zoom and what we're doing now, and there's one argument that says that the need has been lessened to travel, and we know budgets have been reduced. And certainly as you look at annual budgets that have been put in place at the beginning of this year, you think about travel budgets, it's not surprising that people are rethinking whether they have the travel budget available and the inclination to travel through the end of this year. So I would expect that we'll be depressed, or will remain depressed through the end of this year, and hopefully next year really start to rebound. But I think in terms of what we can do, I think, again, clearly part of my message has been a little concerning, a little frustrating probably, but I also see it as a tremendous opportunity to reinvent and rethink about how do we rethink how we do some of these things and really reinvent the business so that we're focused on the experience. We really understand what drives an attendee to attend and what makes, and where that intersection is between that experience and what we can profitably and realistically, technologically offer. That's going to be, and the planners and the groups that figure that out, to me, will see a resurgence in business. But if we try to do things the same exact way we did them 2, 3, 20 years ago, I think it's going to be a real challenge. It's going to certainly be a slower build. So that to me would be the challenge to everyone on this call. And certainly we see that as an exciting challenge, which is how do you reinvent this business in a way that really creates more of a surge and clearly a surge in early travel for business events starting now, but really, especially in 2022.
Couldn't agree with you more, Chris. The writing's on the wall. Events have to go from nice to attend to must attend. I mean, that's that to get people out of this new routine of delivering content virtually and managing lesser business travel budgets, because certainly that's going to be an outcome going forward. 2 years of less business expense is not going to be refunded, in any time soon. So the challenge is on for business event organizers to really reconsider their value proposition and act on that to ensure that they're considered in the must-attend category in the markets that they serve.
Do you think that planners or attendees, either one, would be more willing to look at second or third tier cities based on these desires? Maybe, if they have to go virtual, or if people are wanting hybrid and they have smaller in-person attendance, or for other reasons, do you think planners and attendees would be more willing to consider a second or third tier destination for their meeting if it kind of gave them either more comfort or a better price or a different destination, or any reasons? Do you think that's kind of in our future, that they'd be more willing to look at other locations, assuming there was appropriate space?
Accessibility, cost, and safety, I think, are still very, very important factors for decision making. So, those factors, I think, will continue to be critical. But to Chris's point, if you believe all things being equal, a certain destination has a certain dynamism or a relatively unique quality that will satisfy the attendee and perhaps draw more attendance than otherwise, then yes, I think those destinations will remain competitive.
Yeah, and I happen to think, some have disagreed with me on this, and I may be wrong about it, but based on what we're seeing in the data and in my read on the market or the industry right now, is I do believe there's a real opportunity for smaller markets to gain market share in this environment, where you've got the cloud connected meeting I described earlier, where call it 4 to 5 different smaller markets around the country are hosting regional meetings where they can provide the networking capability. They're accessible by car instead of by air, or by car and air. And, they can provide a really unique experience, but they can also be then connected via the cloud for primary, for major content, for spreading the cost of, expensive speakers, for example, or whatever it might be, across each of those venues, so that it becomes truly a hybrid meeting, but a cloud connected meeting. I do think there's an opportunity there that it's complicated. It's more expensive, it's complicated to do well, but I do believe there's an opportunity there to kind of bring together a lot of what we've seen in the data in terms of what an attendee wants anyway.
Great. Well, we are at an hour now, and I don't have any more open questions, but I want to take this opportunity to thank both of you so much for joining us today. I think the information you've provided is going to be so beneficial for all of our partners and those who maybe will need to watch this afterwards, watch the recording afterwards. So thank you both so much. And thank you all of our partners who are tuning into this webinar. We hope that this information will help you. And if there's anything that we can do for you, please reach out to us at Visit NC, and we're here for you. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and take care.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.